I'm standing on the floor right now. Nothing dramatic, no rockets, no black holes, just me and the ground. And I can feel something, a steady push up through my feet. Now here's the first unfair question. If gravity is the earth pulling me down, why don't I feel the earth pulling? What I actually feel is the floor pushing. Take the floor away, and that feeling vanishes. So already, the most honest start is this. Weight is a contact force. It's not a mysterious long-distance hand grabbing my body. But then what is gravity, physically? If it's not the sensation of being pulled, what is it? Because when I let go, I fall. And that falling is the whole problem. So let's not decorate it. Let's look at what happens when the push disappears. Imagine an elevator cable snaps. For a moment, everything inside falls together. My stomach floats. A coin I drop doesn't drop past my hand. It just hangs there beside me. Did gravity turn off? No. The Earth didn't suddenly stop being massive. What changed is that there's no floor pushing on me anymore. No contact force, no weight, just motion. So here's the next step. I should stop thinking of gravity as the thing I feel. Gravity is what shapes the motion when nothing is touching. That sounds simple, but it's a trap. Because the moment I say shapes the motion, I have to ask, how? By what rule? And why that rule? If I'm honest, I can predict falling very well, before I can explain what falling really means. So let's build the prediction machine first, then interrogate it. There's a reason the old picture is so seductive. It works. With one simple idea, I can calculate how fast things fall, how planets move, how moons stay in orbit. A rule that says the attraction grows with mass and weakens with distance. On a napkin, it's almost embarrassing how much you can do. Double the distance, the pull drops a lot. Bring things closer, the pull ramps up fast. And when I combine that with inertia, this stubborn tendency of matter to keep doing what it's doing, I get orbits. Not as a special miracle, as falling that never ends. That's already a clue. If orbit is a kind of fall, then falling can't just mean going down. It's something deeper, a continuous bending away from the straight path you'd otherwise take. Hold on to that word, straight, because soon we'll have to ask what straight even means. Here's the sideways fall idea in plain language. Fire a cannonball fast enough horizontally. It starts to fall like anything else, but as it falls, the Earth's surface curves away beneath it. If it's fast enough, it keeps missing the ground. That's an orbit. So the old theory doesn't just say things fall. It says exactly how the bending depends on distance. And it nails a huge range of phenomena. But now I'm going to be picky, because prediction is not explanation. Saying there's a force is a label. It's not a mechanism. What is it about the Earth here that makes the moon way over there bend its path? How does that influence get from here to there? If you let the word force do the thinking for you, you won't notice the real mystery. So I want to drag the mystery back into the light. And the easiest way is to ask a rude question about timing. Suppose I change something about the Earth, move a mountain, shift mass around, whatever. When does the moon find out? Immediately? After a delay? If it's immediate, then I can do something here and affect motion there with no time cost. That's not just weird, that's dangerous. Because the moment I allow instantaneous influence, I can start playing games with cause and effect. I can start inventing messages that outrun every signal. And the universe does not seem built that way. Everything else we know about information has a speed limit. Light doesn't get to cheat. Radio doesn't get to cheat. Nothing gets to cheat. So a picture where gravity is a force reaching across space like a rigid rod starts to clash with the rest of physics. Now, to be fair, the classical theory can still calculate beautifully without answering this. But if I care about what gravity is, I can't ignore the timing question, so I'm going to force the issue. Here's the tension in one sentence. The old rule treats gravity like an influence that can be there everywhere at once. But the modern rule of the world says influence travels and travel takes time. So something has to give. Either gravity isn't really an instantaneous pull, or our idea of space and time is missing something. And once I say space and time, I've already stepped onto the new road. Because the speed limit isn't just about light, it's about the structure of causality itself, what can affect what, and in what order. Now I want a test that doesn't require me to believe any fancy philosophy, a test I can do with my own nerves and a few simple observations. So I'm going to trap myself in a box. No windows, no clues, just me, a floor, and a little experiment. And inside that box, gravity starts to look suspiciously like something else. I'm in a sealed elevator, no windows, no outside reference. I feel a steady push from the floor, a familiar weight. Now I ask, am I sitting on Earth, held down by gravity? Or am I in deep space with the elevator accelerating upward? Inside the box, with no peeking, I can't tell. Drop a ball. It falls to the floor either way. Stand still. The floor presses into my feet either way. That's not a poetic coincidence. That's a hard statement about nature. It says, locally, gravity and acceleration can be the same thing in disguise. Now I do one more trick. I send a beam of light straight across the cabin from one wall to the other. If the elevator accelerates upward while the light is in flight, the far wall moves. The beam hits slightly lower than the point I aimed at. So, in an accelerating elevator, light appears to bend. And if acceleration can impersonate gravity, then gravity must also bend light, at least in the same local sense. That's a shocking sentence if you grew up thinking gravity is just a force on masses. Because light has no rest mass, yet the geometry of its path can still change. Now I'm cornered into a new kind of explanation, not a force that pulls, but a rule that tells paths, matter paths and light paths, how to curve. And the earlier clue comes back, straight. What I called straight motion depends on the stage it moves through. If the stage itself is distorted, then falling can be motion along the natural straightest line available. And weight is what I feel when the floor prevents me from following that line. That's the most honest pivot I can make. From here on, I have to talk about the structure of space-time and the limits of causality, because gravity is tangled up with both. So now I have two facts on the table. First, inside a small falling elevator, gravity disappears. Second, inside a small accelerating elevator, gravity can be faked. That forces me to stop asking, what force is pulling? And start asking, what rule decides which paths are allowed? But the moment I say rule, I also have to respect one more rule that nature seems obsessed with, causality. If I do something here and it influences something there, that influence has to travel. And traveling takes time. So I need a clean way to talk about what can influence what without hand-waving. I do it by talking about events. An event is a simple thing. A flash of light at a place and a time. A button press. A click in a detector. Now watch what happens when I ask which events can be connected by a signal. Suppose I press a button and a light turns on across the room. There's a before and an after. But not every pair of events can be ordered that way by a cause, because the signal can't go infinitely fast. Here's the clean picture in my head. From any event, there is a region of the future that can be reached by a signal moving at or below light speed. And there is a region that cannot be reached without cheating. That boundary is what people call a light cone. Not because it's mystical, but because it's a simple bookkeeping device for causality. Inside the cone, influence is possible. Outside the cone, influence is forbidden, unless I'm willing to break the idea of cause coming before effect. So if gravity is a real physical influence, it must respect that structure, which means the instant pull across space story can't be the whole story. And that pushes me toward a stranger, but tighter, explanation. Let me say it in the most honest way I know. In free fall, I'm not being pulled in the sense of feeling a pull. I'm following the natural path available to me, and the reason it looks like I'm accelerating is that my idea of a straight line is naive. On a flat sheet of paper, a straight line is obvious. On the surface of a sphere, the straightest path is not what your eyes call straight on a map. The surface itself changes what straight means. Now I'm going to make the same move, but with the arena where motion happens, not just space, space and time together. Because the elevator trick tells me gravity is woven into the rules of motion, not added as a separate push. So I trade the word force for a different word, geometry. When I say geometry, I don't mean a drawing with pretty curves. I mean something measurable. I mean that rulers and clocks, distance and time, don't behave the same way everywhere when mass and energy are present. Then straight motion becomes the path that maximizes the time on my own clock, the path that feels force-free. That's why in free fall I feel nothing pushing on me. I'm doing the natural thing. And weight becomes the feeling of being prevented from following that natural path. The floor is forcing me to deviate from it. This also explains why the elevator trick is so powerful. Acceleration changes the geometry of my coordinates inside the box in a way that mimics gravity locally. But I have to be careful. If gravity were only a coordinate illusion, there would be no genuine effects left. So the next question is the one that separates a trick from reality. What's left that I cannot transform away? What's left are the differences from place to place. Even if I'm falling, two nearby points can want to fall in slightly different ways. That's the tidal effect. It's the reason falling toward a planet is not exactly the same everywhere inside a big object. It's also why oceans bulge and stretch. And it's why the geometric story is not just wordplay. It predicts real relative accelerations between nearby falling paths. Now bring back the light beam in the elevator. If acceleration bends the apparent path of light and gravity locally imitates acceleration, then gravity must bend light. But there's an even more personal consequence than bending. Clocks. If gravity is geometry of space-time, then it must affect how time accumulates along different paths, different clocks, different histories, different tick rates, and that is something I can test with ridiculous precision. Imagine two identical clocks. One stays lower, deeper in the gravitational field. The other is higher up. If my geometric picture is right, they won't stay synchronized forever, not because the clocks are broken, because time itself is being counted differently along those two world lines. This shows up as frequency shifts in light, as timing offsets, as signals arriving a little early or late compared to the old expectations. And the beauty is, these aren't vague effects you can argue about with philosophy. They are engineering problems, because once you build systems that depend on timing to nanosecond precision, nature stops being forgiving. So instead of waving my arms about curved space-time, I can point to machines that would simply fail if the geometry story were wrong. Let me give you the cleanest example I know, the system you use when you're lost. Take GPS. At its core, it's a clock comparison machine. Satellites carry very stable clocks. Your receiver compares timing signals from several satellites. From those time differences, it infers distances. From distances, it triangulates your position. Now notice the trap. If the timing is off by a tiny amount, the inferred distance is off by a huge amount because light travels fast. So the entire system lives or dies on whether the clocks agree. But the satellites are moving fast compared to you, and they are also higher in the gravitational field than you. So if time is affected by motion and gravity, as the geometric picture insists, those satellite clocks will drift relative to clocks on Earth. And they do. The drift isn't a cute academic correction. If I ignored it, the position errors would grow quickly, fast enough to make the system unreliable. So the system is built with relativistic corrections from the start, not as decoration, as survival. That's the kind of evidence I love because it's not someone believing in a theory. It's a device either working or not working. And GPS is only the beginning. If time really depends on motion and on gravity, then fast particles should live longer than they ought to, and accelerators should reveal the same geometry through pure measurement. So after clocks in orbit, I want to go smaller and faster, down to the level where nature has no patience for my intuitions. All right, clocks in orbit are one kind of proof. Now I want a proof where nothing is engineered for relativity, where nature just does it to you whether you like it or not. So I look at particles coming from the sky. High up in the atmosphere, fast particles are created, including muons. Muons don't last long when they're at rest. If I use the old everyday idea of time, most of them should vanish long before reaching the ground. But they show up down here anyway, in huge numbers, so something has to give. Either I believe in a miracle muon factory making them right above my head, or I accept the boring, brutal answer. Their internal clocks are running slower relative to mine because they're moving so fast. That's not a metaphor. It's the same time bookkeeping I needed for satellites. It's the same structure behind the elevator argument. And now I'm going to push that structure until it squeals, using the fastest machines we've ever built. In accelerators, I take particles and I keep giving them energy. If my old intuition were right, I'd just keep adding speed in the same simple way forever. But that's not what happens. As the speed gets close to light speed, I can pour in enormous energy and the speed barely budges. Instead, what grows dramatically is the particle's momentum and energy. That's a measurable thing. It shows up in how hard the particle is to deflect with magnets. It shows up in the energy I have to pay to bend its path. So nature is screaming the same message in 3 different accents, in falling elevators, in satellites, and in particle rings. And once I accept that, the speed limit stops being a detail. It becomes the skeleton of reality. Because if I could send influences faster than that limit, I could scramble the order of cause and effect between different observers. That's not weird. That's logically poisonous. So when I ask, how does gravity work? I'm forced to answer in a way that respects the speed limit all the way down, and that leads straight into the most honest summary I can give. Here is the honest answer, with no perfume on it. Gravity is not best understood as a pulling force that reaches across space like an invisible rope. The deeper story is that mass and energy change the rules for measuring space and time. They change what straight means. And when straight changes, free motion changes. A falling object is not being dragged by a hand it can feel. It is following the natural path permitted by the geometry it's inside. That's why weight is such a good trap. Weight feels like gravity, but weight is what happens when the floor prevents free fall. The push in my feet is the constraint. The falling is the freedom. Now combine that with causality. If gravity is real physics, it cannot update the universe instantly. Changes have to propagate. Information has to travel. The structure of cause and effect has boundaries. And the modern world has even watched gravity announce itself through traveling disturbances, arriving across detectors as a signal that moved at a finite speed, not as an instant whisper everywhere at once. So the geometric picture isn't a poetic preference. It's how you make gravity obey the same causal bookkeeping everything else obeys. So when you ask me, how does gravity work, my most honest answer is this. I don't start with a story about a pull. I start with the fact that in free fall, I feel no force at all. And that forces me to treat gravity as the structure of motion, not a sensation. I can tell you what it does with terrifying accuracy. I can build GPS. I can predict muons arriving at the ground. I can steer particles in rings where relativity is not optional. And I can tell you what gravity is made of in the cleanest operational sense. It is the way space and time are arranged so that straight ahead is not what your instincts think it is. Now go back to where I began. I'm standing on the floor. I feel that push in my feet. The earth is not pulling in a way my nerves can detect. The floor is stopping me from following my natural path through space-time. That's the honest answer. Not because it's final, but because it's the tightest story that matches what the universe actually lets me measure.